December 1944. The forest of Hürtgen is quiet. Too quiet. Frost hangs in the air. Pine branches drip with frozen mist. Somewhere between Aachen and the Belgian border, a lone German sniper adjusts his scope atop the shattered remnants of a farmhouse. Below, through drifting fog, a column of American infantry moves cautiously, olive-drab figures fading in and out of the trees. Their breath steams. Their boots crunch the frost. The sniper steadies his Karabiner 98K. One slow inhale, one half squeeze of the trigger. A crack shatters the silence. A single GI collapses in the snow. But before the echo fades, something unexpected erupts. A staccato roar of return fire, not one rifle, but dozens. The forest bursts with the thunder of semi-automatics, fast, rhythmic, relentless. Bark splinters around the German position. The air fills with the unmistakable sound of American M1 Garands, each shot echoing with factory precision. The sniper ducks, stunned. His rifle, bolt action and slow, suddenly feels ancient, a relic in a world that has moved on. And in that frozen forest, the old art of the solitary marksman meets the industrial rhythm of modern war. By late 1944, Europe was collapsing under the weight of total war. The once unstoppable Wehrmacht was now a shadow of its former self, retreating westward through shattered cities, ruined farmlands, and forests choked with snow and smoke. From Normandy's beaches to the Siegfried Line, German defenses had been pounded relentlessly by Allied air power and artillery. Yet even in retreat, they fought with precision, patience, and lethal skill. Among the most feared weapons left in Hitler's arsenal were his snipers, silent hunters trained in the meticulous craft of marksmanship. They were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had learned to survive in sub-zero temperatures, picking off Soviet soldiers from tree lines and church towers with deadly calm. The sniper's creed was simple: one shot, one kill. In an army crumbling under the strain of attrition, these men became ghosts of the battlefield, multiplying fear through a single bullet. Their weapon of choice, the Karabiner 98K, was Germany's trusted bolt-action rifle. Rugged, accurate, and built with meticulous craftsmanship, it had served since the late 1930s. In the hands of an expert, it could strike targets at 600 meters or more with chilling precision. Fitted with Zeiss optics, it was the perfect tool for surgical warfare, precise, patient, deliberate. Across the lines, however, the American infantryman was armed differently, not with elegance, but with efficiency. The M1 Garand, mass-produced in Springfield and Winchester factories, was not about precision, it was about speed, rhythm, and fire dominance. Where a German sniper could fire one well-placed round every few seconds, a U.S. rifleman could unleash 8 in the same time with remarkable accuracy. The war was no longer defined by the individual marksman's art, but by the industrialization of lethality. Throughout 1944, as the Allies advanced across France, reports filtered through German ranks. "The Americans are firing too fast," one soldier complained in a field letter recovered after the war. "They shoot before you can even reload." To the Wehrmacht's traditionalists, men raised on the precision of single-shot discipline, this new rhythm was disorienting. In Normandy's hedgerows, where every movement risked drawing fire, the tempo of combat had changed. U.S. infantry squads now moved in coordinated bursts, riflemen laying down suppressive fire with Garands, while Browning automatic rifles advanced with devastating volume. For the first time in modern history, ordinary soldiers carried the power of a firing squad. German snipers, trained to exploit hesitation and isolation, found little of it now. They would fire, relocate, and before their bolt could chamber the next round, a storm of return fire would erupt. Trees shattered, walls splintered, and the once invisible hunter became the hunted. Yet Germany still believed in precision as an art of war. Generations of doctrine, from Prussian marksmanship schools to the sniper duels of Stalingrad, had cultivated a belief that skill outweighed speed. But by 1944, the industrial world had rewritten that equation. Factories in Illinois and Massachusetts were now producing rifles faster than entire German divisions could be re-equipped. The contrast between the two armies became symbolic of their nations. Germany still prized craftsmanship, rifles hand-fitted, optics individually tuned. America prized production, interchangeable parts, millions of weapons identical in function and reliability. Every U.S. soldier entering combat carried a weapon that could fire 8 rounds without pause, a revolution in infantry warfare. The Garand semi-automatic mechanism, designed by Canadian-born engineer John K. Garand, had been tested for over a decade before it became standard issue in 1936. Now, in the bitter winter of 1944, it was proving its worth across Europe. As German sharpshooters lay hidden among the ruins, they were not facing amateurs. They were facing a new kind of soldier, one trained in teamwork, covered by overwhelming firepower, and confident that his rifle would not jam when his life depended on it. The forests of Hürtgen, the rubble of Aachen, and the frozen banks of the River would all bear witness to this changing of eras, where the solitary art of precision marksmanship collided with the relentless advance of industrial warfare. And as the battles intensified, another truth emerged. Speed and volume could suppress even the most perfect aim. When the M1 Garand entered service in the late 1930s, few could have predicted how profoundly it would reshape the battlefield. At first, traditionalists within the U.S. Army dismissed the idea of a semi-automatic rifle for every infantryman. They feared wasted ammunition, jamming mechanisms, and untrained soldiers firing too fast. But as the war expanded, America's unmatched industrial capacity silenced those doubts. By 1944, over 4 million M1 Garands had rolled off American assembly lines, stamped, inspected, and shipped across the Atlantic. Every crate symbolized something larger than a weapon, the transformation of war itself. The United States had turned marksmanship into manufacturing. Each Garand was a triumph of design simplicity. An 8-round en-bloc clip fed directly into the receiver, automatically ejecting with its iconic metallic ping when empty, a sound that would echo through forests and villages across Europe. The rifle's gas-operated system harnessed part of each bullet's energy to cycle the action, allowing for a rate of fire nearly 3 times faster than the German Kar-98K. Soldiers could engage multiple targets without ever taking their eyes off the sights. For the average GI, this was more than a rifle. It was a promise of survival. In the chaos of Normandy hedgerows or the frozen mud of the Ardennes, seconds mattered. When German machine guns opened up, those extra rounds, fired in quick succession, could pin down an enemy squad or force a sniper from cover. Meanwhile, Germany's sniper corps faced a grim transformation of its own. The Wehrmacht, stretched across 2 collapsing fronts, no longer had the luxury of hand-picking and grooming elite marksmen. The days of specialized sniper schools, like the one established in Seetalar Alpe in 1942, were fading. Experienced veterans were dying faster than replacements could be trained. And those replacements, often rushed from training camps or pulled from regular infantry units, lacked the patience and precision of their predecessors. Still, the legend of the German sniper persisted. American troops learned to fear the unseen riflemen who haunted towns and tree lines. Units often spoke of 1 shot, 1 man down, followed by hours of silence. These encounters left psychological scars that outlasted the firefight itself. But by mid-1944, something was changing. U.S. squads were learning to respond with discipline and coordination, not panic. Field manuals began emphasizing counter-sniper tactics, immediate suppression with semi-automatic fire, coordinated movement, and use of smoke. The M1 Garand was central to this doctrine. Its fire rate allowed GIs to saturate suspected sniper positions within seconds, forcing the hidden shooter to either retreat or face annihilation. German reports began reflecting this grim reality. Sniper diaries recovered after the war reveal growing frustration. Their rifles shoot too quickly. You fire one shot and they answer with 20. You must run before they even find you. One Obergefreiter wrote near Monschur. Technology was only part of the story. The American doctrine of fire and movement, a principle emphasizing mobility under covering fire, fit perfectly with the M1's capabilities. Instead of standing and aiming carefully, U.S. troops advanced under bursts of accurate semi-automatic fire. German snipers, bound by tradition and slower rifles, found themselves overwhelmed not just by numbers, but by a rhythm of warfare they could no longer control. Even in urban ruins where snipers once reigned supreme, the tide turned. In Aachen and later in the Ardennes, the Garand's rapid cycling allowed American riflemen to clear buildings floor by floor, maintaining suppressive fire without relying on submachine guns or heavy support. The bolt-action precision of the Kar-98K was simply too slow for the chaos of close-quarters combat. The contrast was unmistakable. The German rifle represented an era of craftsmanship, wood and steel shaped by expert hands. The American Garand represented standardization, a rifle not built for the individual, but for the army as a whole. And that difference mirrored the war itself. One nation fighting with artistry, the other with assembly lines. By winter 1944, as both sides bled through the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg, the lesson was becoming clear. The sniper's age of dominance was ending, and the semi-automatic rifle was writing a new chapter in the story of modern combat. The next battles would prove it, where patience met firepower head-on. Tactical angle, the battlefield redefined. By 1944, the infantry battlefield was no longer governed by patience, but by tempo. Tactics that had once favored the sniper, stealth, concealment, and a single lethal shot, now struggled to survive against the rhythm of semi-automatic fire. The M1 Garand had introduced a new tempo to infantry warfare, faster, louder, and relentless. Traditional German sniper doctrine, inherited from World War I and refined on the Eastern Front, emphasized waiting, hours of stillness for a single decisive bullet. But on the Western Front, that patience became a liability. The Americans didn't pause long enough to be targeted. Their squads advanced in coordinated bursts, with overlapping fields of fire and near-constant movement. Each rifleman was part of a living machine, 8 rounds per clip, one after another, cycling with the same mechanical cadence across entire platoons. When a sniper's shot cracked from a tree line, the American response was instantaneous. Dozens of Garands swung toward the flash or sound, and a wall of return fire filled the forest. This was not random panic fire, it was trained reflex. In the thick woods of Hürtgen, U.S. units developed what they called rifle sweeps. Upon detecting a sniper, soldiers would unleash volleys across the suspected zone in overlapping arcs, shredding foliage, walls, and bark. Even if the shooter survived, his cover was gone, and with it, his advantage. The tactical equation had reversed. Where once one sniper could immobilize a platoon, now an entire platoon could neutralize a sniper. Firepower, not finesse, dictated who survived the minute that followed the first shot. And that minute, in the Hürtgen and Ardennes, often decided everything. Human angle, the shock of the old guard. For German snipers, the first encounters with semi-automatic fire were not just tactical losses, they were existential shocks. Many had come from families of hunters or marksmen, raised on the ethos that war rewarded patience and precision. They had survived the Eastern Front by believing that skill and discipline could overcome mass. But the Western Front shattered that illusion. Veterans recalled feeling outgunned for the first time. Their trusted Kar 98K rifles, symbols of craftsmanship and national pride, suddenly seemed inadequate. They fired a single shot, worked the bolt, and by the time they raised their scopes again, the air was already alive with dozens of supersonic rounds tearing through the trees. One post-war account by a sniper of the 12th Volksgrenadier Division described the moment vividly. "The first time I heard their rifles, I thought they had machine guns. The sound was constant, not bursts, not random, just constant. You shoot once and they drown you in return fire." The psychological toll was immense. Snipers relied on fear, the enemy's fear of being hunted. But now, American infantry radiated confidence. The M1's reliability gave them courage to advance, even under threat of unseen shooters. The old predator-prey dynamic had flipped. The hunter now felt hunted. The Germans, long accustomed to technological superiority, their optics, their rifles, their discipline, faced an emotional reckoning. For the first time, they were not just outnumbered, they were out-evolved. Technological angle. The rifles that defined eras. At the heart of this clash was a contrast in design philosophy. The German Karabiner 98K was the last masterpiece of an older generation, an evolution of the Gewehr 19 that had served the Kaiser's army in the Great War. It was elegant, solid, and engineered for accuracy, but it was built for a slower world, one where soldiers fired from trenches, not while advancing through machine gun fire. Its bolt-action mechanism required manual cycling after every shot. Skilled marksmen could maintain respectable rates of fire, but even the best could not exceed 15 aimed shots per minute. Each reload, a 5-round stripper clip, broke the rifleman's rhythm. The M1 Garand changed that forever. It was gas-operated, semi-automatic, and self-loading. A trained GI could fire 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute without losing his sight picture. The rifle weighed about the same as the Kar 98K, yet handled recoil more smoothly, allowing for sustained engagement at both medium and close ranges. The result was not just higher firepower, it was psychological dominance. German soldiers began referring to the Garand as the semi-automatic devil. Its metallic ping became a haunting sound across the Western Front, the telltale signal that an American was reloading, but also a reminder of how many rounds he'd already fired. Technological superiority no longer meant craftsmanship, it meant mechanical rhythm. Where the Kar 98K was built for the marksman, the Garand was built for the army. And in a total war fought across continents, it was the latter philosophy that prevailed. The United States had not only outproduced its enemies, it had out-innovated them. Every infantryman now carried a weapon once reserved for elites. Precision was no longer the privilege of the few. It was the standard of the many. And as the forests of Western Europe filled with the steady thunder of semi-automatic fire, The sniper's era of silent dominance faded into the background hum of progress. The clash between skill and speed was far from over, but the outcome was already becoming clear. Leadership and doctrine, the clash of military minds. Behind every rifle fired in the forests of Europe stood a doctrine, a philosophy of war shaped by culture, industry, and leadership. For the Germans, the sniper represented discipline and individuality. He was the embodiment of the Einzelschütze, the solitary expert who could hold ground through sheer skill. This belief came from a long martial tradition dating back to the Prussian era when individual marksmanship was prized as the highest form of military craftsmanship. American commanders, however, thought differently. From the earliest days of U.S. Army modernization, thinkers like General George S. Patton and Lieutenant General Omar Bradley emphasized firepower through teamwork, not individual glory. Patton famously called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised, not because of its elegance, but because it multiplied the fighting power of every man in the line. German sniper tactics were centered around static defense. Find a vantage point, wait, and eliminate targets of opportunity. This was effective in the open plains of Russia or the urban ruins of Stalingrad, but it faltered in the fast-moving, fluid combat of the Western Front. The Americans didn't stay still long enough to be stalked. Their squads rotated constantly, leapfrogging positions, covering each other with overlapping fire, and using the Garand's speed to suppress instead of merely engage. Even the smallest American rifle squad mirrored an industrial mindset, each soldier part of a larger machine that worked in synchronization. When a sniper was detected, every rifle on the line reacted within seconds. German commanders, used to controlling engagement tempo through elite marksmen, now faced an enemy whose tempo was beyond control, dictated not by officers, but by the rhythm of the rifles themselves. Doctrine met reality, and one philosophy was buried in the snow. Moral angle. The end of the craftsman's war. The duel between German snipers and American riflemen symbolized more than a clash of armies. It marked the end of an age. For centuries, warfare had carried traces of craftsmanship. Musketeers, archers, and sharpshooters were judged by accuracy, patience, and artistry. The sniper, in many ways, was the last heir of that tradition, a craftsman in a world turning to factories. But World War II did not reward artistry. It rewarded output. The United States had entered the conflict with a moral and material belief that mass production could win wars, that democracy's strength lay in its assembly lines as much as its ideals. Every Garand that rolled off a Springfield or Winchester factory floor represented not just a weapon, but a moral statement. Precision was no longer the privilege of the few. For the Germans, this was disorienting. Their war culture still celebrated the artisan soldier, the sniper, the tank ace, the individual who triumphed through excellence. America's culture, by contrast, celebrated the collective, the factory worker, the engineer, the logistics officer who made sure the rifle never stopped firing. This wasn't just a tactical shift, it was a philosophical one. The sniper's creed of patience and mastery, the belief that skill could overcome mass, died quietly beneath the thunder of mechanized fire. In this moral transformation lay the deeper truth of the war. Humanity was learning that in modern conflict, the craftsman's bullet could no longer compete with the factory's storm. The soldier was no longer an artist of death, but a component of a vast industrial rhythm. And in that rhythm, the M1 Garand played the note that defined the century. Enemy's perspective, inside the scope. To understand this shift most vividly, one must look through the sniper scope itself. Captured diaries, after-action reports, and post-war interviews reveal how profoundly the semi-automatic rifle changed the German perception of battle. In early 1944, Oberleutnant Heinz Torvald, one of the Wehrmacht's most decorated snipers, reportedly trained new recruits to control the battlefield through fear, not volume. By late that year, even his seasoned protégés were shaken. "They fire too much, too quickly," one trainee wrote from Belgium. "You cannot make them afraid when they do not stop shooting." This was the psychological disarmament of an army built on fear as a weapon. Snipers thrived on silence, the tension before a shot, the enemy's hesitation. But the Americans replaced silence with constant fire. The forests echoed with overlapping shots, an endless rhythm that left no room for fear to grow. Reports from captured German soldiers repeatedly noted the demoralizing effect of American firepower. It was not their courage, it was their rifles. They never seemed to run out of bullets, one prisoner told interrogators near Malmedy. The German snipers who survived the war often spoke with respect, even admiration for the M1. Some confessed that they had underestimated it until it was too late. A few even scavenged Garands from fallen Americans, using them in desperation when their own ammunition ran short. The irony was bitter. The precision artist forced to borrow the industrialist's tool. For the Wehrmacht, this change came too late. The age of the lone sharpshooter was ending, replaced by the synchronized thunder of semi-automatic fire. Through the cold scope of the Kar-98K, many German snipers saw not just their enemies, but the future of warfare, and realized they were aiming at something they could no longer defeat. The battlefield was now a contest of rhythm, not range, and that rhythm was about to reach its breaking point in the forests and ruins of Western Europe. The forests of Western Europe in the final months of 1944 became a graveyard for German marksmanship. The Hürtgen forest, a labyrinth of fir trees, fog, and frozen mud, was supposed to be ideal terrain for snipers. Visibility was short, movement was slow, and the terrain punished mechanized units. To German tacticians, it was the perfect place to bleed the advancing Americans dry. For weeks, snipers of the 275th and 344th Volksgrenadier divisions haunted the woods. They took positions in shattered treetops, half-collapsed bunkers, and the upper floors of ruined farmhouses. Their scopes peered through gaps in the fog, searching for shapes that didn't belong. The flicker of movement, a helmet's glint, a figure stepping from the trees. At first, the results were devastating. American patrols lost men without ever seeing their killers. Medical litters carried the wounded back through the mud, while platoons learned to move low, in silence. Sniper fire eroded morale like acid. In those first days, every shadow seemed alive. But soon, something shifted. The M1 Garand changed the rhythm of fear. When the next shot rang out, a single crisp crack from a hidden German rifle, the American response was instant and overwhelming. Entire squads turned toward the sound and unleashed synchronized volleys. The forest erupted in controlled chaos, bursts of 8-round clips echoing from dozens of barrels. Bark exploded, branches shattered, and snow cascaded from treetops under the storm of fire. The German sniper's greatest advantage, invisibility, evaporated. Within seconds, his world became a cage of ricochets and splinters. He could not move. He could not reload fast enough. He could not outshoot what he could not silence. In after-action reports, U.S. commanders began noting a striking pattern. German sniper fire was decreasing. even in zones previously saturated with it. The hunters were retreating. One officer of the 9th Infantry Division described it simply. Once we started firing back with every rifle in the line, the woods went quiet. That quiet was deceptive, not victory, but transformation. Because even as the Hürtgen forests burned and froze, a larger battle loomed to the south. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's final gamble. In December 1944, German forces launched a massive surprise counterattack through Belgium and Luxembourg. Once again, snipers were deployed to sow confusion and delay American reinforcements. But the battlefield had changed. The Americans who entered the Ardennes were no longer green troops from Normandy. They were hardened veterans. They had learned to listen for the snap of a supersonic bullet and answer with fire, not fear. When German marksmen opened fire on convoys or supply routes, the response was instant, semi-automatic thunder echoing through the snow-covered woods. U.S. riflemen moved like clockwork, 2 firing, 2 advancing, 2 covering. Every tree became a position of return fire. Every foxhole became a miniature arsenal. One account from the 2nd Infantry Division described a typical engagement near Krinkelte-Rocherat. They shot one of our scouts from the tree line. We all hit the ground, aimed high, and just started firing. You couldn't see him, but you could see where the snow was shaking. After that, no more shots came. What once took a trained marksman to eliminate now took collective reflex, a reaction powered not by individual skill, but by shared firepower. In that transformation lay the true turning point. The sniper's bullet, once the punctuation mark of fear, was drowned in the constant roar of semi-automatic return fire. The M1 Garand had democratized lethality, turning every American rifleman into a threat that no hidden shooter could safely ignore. German field officers began to acknowledge it in their dispatches. One report from the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division lamented, "The Americans fight with rifles that fire like machine guns. Our sharpshooters are no longer effective unless the enemy is surprised completely." But surprise was now a luxury Germany could no longer afford. By the time the Battle of the Bulge reached its midpoint in January 1945, sniper reports had all but disappeared from frontline summaries. The Wehrmacht's trained marksmen were being killed faster than they could inflict losses. The bolt-action Kar-98K, precise but slow, had met its limit in a war that no longer waited for precision. The turning point was not one moment, but a pattern repeating across countless frozen forests, fields, and villages. A sniper fires, the forest answers, the silence returns, this time final. And in that silence, an era ends. By early 1945, the myth of the invincible German sniper had begun to collapse. Not because the men behind the scopes had lost their nerve, but because the battlefield itself had evolved beyond their reach. The Karabiner 98K, the standard German rifle, was a masterpiece of engineering precision. Bolt action, 5 rounds, lethal out to 800 meters in the right hands. A perfect tool for a war of patience and concealment. But against the industrial rhythm of modern warfare, that precision was now a curse. Every manual reload, every second spent chambering the next round, meant exposure. In contrast, the American M1 Garand had redefined tempo. 8 rounds, semi-automatic, gas-operated, it could unleash sustained fire in seconds, and reloads were lightning fast thanks to the en-bloc clip system. The moment one rifle fired, another echoed, and another, until it became impossible for any lone marksman to tell where one shot ended and the next began. For the German sniper, this wasn't just a tactical disadvantage, it was psychological annihilation. Reports from captured soldiers tell of men abandoning sniper posts after just a few encounters with Garand-equipped units. One prisoner, taken near Munschau, told interrogators, "Your rifles fire like sewing machines. You can't hide from them. You shoot once, and 100 bullets come back." It wasn't an exaggeration. American platoons had begun integrating their semi-automatic fire into coordinated patterns, turning rifle squads into fluid, suppressive machines. When a sniper was spotted, or even suspected, the response wasn't fear or retreat, it was volume. The battlefield itself became hostile to the sniper's art. In earlier wars, the sniper had dominated with patience, using isolation as power. But in the industrial killing zones of the late Second World War, where artillery, mortars, and air power blurred every line, that isolation became fatal. The solitary marksman, once feared as the ghost of the battlefield, now risked becoming its most fragile target. Even elite units like the Wehrmacht Jägers and SS sharpshooters found their craft eroding under relentless American fire discipline. Entire German sniper schools, such as the famed Zussen and Langemarck training centers, had been producing marksmen for years, yet by 1945, their graduates often didn't survive more than a few days in active combat. American field manuals adapted too. The U.S. Army's infantry guides now included counter-sniper procedures, such as fire and locate by saturation, maintain suppressive perimeter fire, and advance in semi-automatic relay. The new doctrine made it clear. The best way to neutralize a sniper was not another sniper, but a squad armed with Garands. This shift in doctrine rippled far beyond tactics. It reshaped how soldiers felt about battle. A U.S. private from the 99th Infantry Division recalled, "In Normandy, you heard one shot and froze. By the time we reached the Bulge, you heard one shot, and everyone answered. We didn't give them time to aim again." The Garand had turned fear into defiance. Every trigger pull was a reminder that the individual soldier was no longer prey. He was part of a machine that could fight back instantly. On the other side, German morale frayed. Snipers who once saw themselves as the unseen elite, silent judges of the battlefield, now faced a storm they couldn't outshoot. Their camouflage, their patience, their precision, all rendered meaningless by a flood of semi-automatic fury. A report from the remnants of the 326th Volksgrenadier Regiment described it bluntly. "The Americans fire as if they have no need to aim. It is impossible to engage them from distance. Our rifles are too slow." That phrase, "too slow," echoed across the Wehrmacht's dying months. Because this wasn't just about rifles. It was about time itself. The M1 Garand represented a faster war, one that rewarded reaction over reflection, speed over stealth. The world that had once belonged to patient snipers and precise shots now belonged to whoever could fill the air with lead first. By the time Allied forces crossed the Rhine in March 1945, the transformation was complete. German sharpshooters were no longer the hunters, they were ghosts, remnants of an earlier age. American infantry squads moved through shattered towns with automatic confidence, each man a node in a web of constant, overlapping fire. The last German snipers of the Reich didn't die from bullets alone. They died from obsolescence. And in that death lay the symbolic end of an era, the fall of the solitary warrior, replaced by the synchronized fire of modern armies. What had once been a duel between individuals had become a symphony of machines, fast, coordinated, and merciless. The trigger of the M1 Garand didn't just fire bullets, it fired history forward. When the thunder of the front finally began to fade in the spring of 1945, the truth was undeniable. The sniper's shadow had been eclipsed by the rifle's roar. In the wreckage of Germany's shattered front lines, Allied investigators recovered hundreds of sniper rifles, carefully camouflaged, finely zeroed, left behind in trenches, towers, and attic nests. Many still had rounds in the chamber, scopes intact, positions undisturbed. Their owners had vanished or surrendered before firing a final shot. The reports coming out of U.S. infantry units told the same story across multiple fronts, from the forests of Hürtgen and Ardennes to the ruins of Cologne and Nuremberg. German snipers, once the unseen arbiters of fear, had been reduced to rare, isolated threats. Not because they lacked skill, but because the tempo of war had overtaken them. The M1 Garand, now universally respected by American troops, had proven its worth beyond question. General George S. Patton famously called it the greatest battle implement ever devised, a sentiment echoed in countless field reports. Units that had initially doubted the semi-automatic system now wrote of its unmatched reliability under mud, frost, and blood. "You pull the trigger and it fires, every time," wrote one corporal from the 30th Infantry Division. "You don't think, you react. And that's why we lived." Across Europe, the psychological landscape of warfare had changed. Before 1944, the German sniper's bullet carried the weight of myth. Invisible, unpredictable, demoralizing. A single shot could halt an entire company for hours. But by 1945, the myth had evaporated in a storm of semi-automatic defiance. Even German post-war analyses would later acknowledge this shift. The Army Ordnance Office concluded that the United States' emphasis on semi-automatic firepower had created a new form of infantry dominance, in which sustained accuracy and rate of fire replaced precision marksmanship as the decisive factor. It was not that German rifles had suddenly become poor weapons. The Karabiner 98K, Gewehr 43, and even the late-war STG-44 were all mechanically advanced, but they represented competing philosophies. The German system favored craftsmanship, perfection through control. The American system favored adaptability, victory through momentum. That difference mattered. For the German sniper, control was everything. Breath, trigger, and timing united in silence. But in the American infantryman's hands, the Garand made timing irrelevant. The weapon demanded no pause between shots, no break in motion. The battlefield became an unbroken rhythm of fire and maneuver. When the Allies crossed the Rhine in March and the Reich began to crumble, snipers who had once defined the German advance in 1941 found themselves relics in 1945. The tools of their dominance, patience, concealment, and perfection, could no longer compete with mechanized tempo and combined arms doctrine. Even the German introduction of the semi-automatic Gewehr 43 came too late and in too few numbers. Produced under resource strain, it never reached the reliability or distribution of the Garand. Its users faced ammunition shortages, mechanical issues, and the collapse of logistical support. By contrast, American supply chains ensured that nearly every frontline GI carried a semi-automatic rifle that worked in snow, rain, or rubble. The numbers told the story clearly. By the end of the war, the U.S. had produced over 5.4 million M1 Garands, while Germany had managed just a fraction of that in all semi-automatic designs combined. This imbalance wasn't merely industrial, it was ideological. The U.S. fought as a nation of citizen soldiers, each armed with the same tool of efficiency. The rifle was a democratic weapon, bridging the gap between individual courage and collective might. In contrast, the German Sniper Corps represented an older order, the idea of the elite individual shaping the battlefield through skill and superiority. But the modern world no longer had space for solitary masters. It rewarded systems, not legends. And so by 1945, the forest duels that had once defined the Eastern Front, one man against another, patience against nerves, had vanished into the noise of mechanized fire. The age of the single bullet was over. The age of the automatic had begun. In the months following Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence teams continued to comb through captured armories and training manuals. What they found told a quiet but profound story. The war had not just ended battles, it had ended philosophies. The German Sniper's Handbook, Merkblatt für Scharfschützen, emphasized invisibility, patience, and independence, traits that once defined modern precision warfare. It taught its marksmen to become the eye of the battlefield, a lone instrument of terror and discipline. But by 1945, that vision no longer fit the reality of war. The New World demanded something different: speed, cooperation, and fire synchronization. Every lesson written in that handbook had been rendered obsolete by one rifle, the M1 Garand. In post-war debriefs, American officers reflected on what the weapon had achieved. It hadn't just improved accuracy, it had transformed infantry doctrine. A squad equipped entirely with semi-automatics could act as its own suppressive unit. Firepower was no longer a support function, it was embedded in every soldier. Major General Julian Hatcher, who oversaw much of the Garand's testing, summarized it simply. The semi-automatic rifle changed the infantryman from a target to a hunter. This shift echoed across future conflicts: Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East. Every modern army that studied the Second World War saw the same pattern. The sniper's dominance declined in proportion to the rise of automatic firepower. But the legacy of the sniper didn't vanish, it evolved. By the 1950s, both NATO and Warsaw Pact nations had reimagined the sniper's purpose. No longer a solitary duelist hidden in the forest, he became a precision tool integrated within a larger machine, paired with spotters, radios, and intelligence networks. The art of the one-man ambush had been reborn as the science of long-range precision. Still, the lessons of 1944 and 1945 remained carved into military memory. The German army had learned that even the best marksman was powerless if his weapon, doctrine, or logistics couldn't keep pace with the enemy's tempo. And for the United States, the M1 Garand became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of the modern soldier, reliable, rapid, and relentless. In the ruins of German towns, the contrast between the two armies was clear even to civilians. Wehrmacht veterans later recalled the shock of hearing the metallic symphony of Garands echoing through the streets, a sound unlike anything Europe had heard before. It wasn't chaos, it was control. Each shot timed to another, creating a rhythm of industrial precision that mirrored the factories back home that had built it. The psychological power of that sound lingered. In post-war memoirs, former German officers often wrote of their awe and fear of America's industrial fire discipline. They saw it not as emotionless efficiency, but as proof that warfare had finally fused man and machine into one entity. They fought like production lines that breathed, wrote a captured officer from the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division. Each rifleman cog, but every cog perfect. And in that realization lay the final truth of the sniper's downfall. The solitary marksman was an artist in an age that had become mechanical. His craft depended on stillness, reflection, and patience, virtues that could not survive in a battlefield driven by engines, radios, and endless ammunition. Yet his spirit never fully disappeared. From the shattered towers of Aachen to the rice pads of Vietnam, the sniper would return, adapted, modernized, and redefined. But his glory days as the lone arbiter of fear, standing above the chaos, had ended in 1945. When American troops finally stood victorious in Europe, the Karabiner 98K rifles they captured were examined with respect, not mockery. Even as they discarded them for their slower rate of fire, they knew they were holding history, the last breath of a dying art. The Garand, meanwhile, became a legend in its own time, not because it was flawless, but because it reflected the future, a future where warfare would no longer hinge on one perfect shot, but on the unbroken rhythm of thousands. In every war, there comes a moment when technology overtakes tradition, when the tools of one generation render the instincts of the last obsolete. For German snipers, that moment came not with defeat at Stalingrad or surrender in Berlin, but in the frozen woods of 1944, when the slow crack of a bolt-action rifle was swallowed by the relentless rhythm of the M1 Garand. It wasn't just a change in weaponry, it was a change in philosophy, from the precision of the individual to the momentum of the collective. The sniper, with his solitude and mastery, represented an older kind of warfare, one that still believed in personal dominance over the battlefield. His shot was a whisper in the chaos, a single decision that shaped the outcome of moments. But the Garand announced something new. It said that the future belonged to those who could fight together, faster, louder, synchronized. The battlefield was no longer a gallery of lone heroes, it was an orchestra of mechanics and movement. When the war ended, many German marksmen returned home broken, not only by loss, but by the realization that their art had vanished with the smoke of their empire. The world no longer needed the silent perfectionist, it needed the adaptable soldier. And yet there's a strange poetry in that transformation, because while the Garand erased the sniper's supremacy, it also carried his legacy forward. Every modern rifleman who fires with precision under pressure, every squad that moves with seamless coordination, carries a fragment of that old discipline, translated, not erased. The forests of Europe are quiet now. The echoes of those duels, the sharp crack of the Mauser, the thunder of the Garand, have long faded into the earth, but the lessons remain carved into military history. That technology doesn't just win wars, it redefines what it means to fight them. In the end, the sniper and the Garand stood on opposite sides of history, one the last craftsman of the old world, the other the herald of the new. And between their gunfire, the modern battlefield was born.